from Columbia in high definition. This is WIS News 10 Awareness.
Whether in comedy or drama, Robin Williams will be remembered as an innovator. His high-energy, rapid-fire brand of comedy first jumped from the stage of his stand-up career
Good morning, Austin.
to the small screen as an alien from the planet Orc on TV's Mork and Mindy.
Your suit's on backwards.
It is. Boy, do I feel like a clone.
At your service.
Before launching a long and varied film career.
What is it, demilitarized?
There, Williams handled everything from waking up servicemen
Good morning, Vietnam! Come on.
to wrangling a house full of children as Mrs. Doubtfire, to giving some dance pointers at the birdcage.
Do fussy, fussy, fussy. You do Martha Graham, Martha Graham, Martha Graham.
Even granting wishes as one of Disney's all-time most beloved characters.
You ain't never had a friend like me.
He wasn't a comedian. He was a comedy machine. He was a comedy dervish whirling in front of your very eyes.
There it is.
In his more serious roles, Williams often was a mentor,
I want you to find your own walk right now.
like the inspirational professor leading the Dead Poets Society,
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
or an imperfect psychologist challenging Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting.
Ever disrespect my wife again, I will end you. Got the chief?
That role earned him an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor.
This might be the one time I'm speechless.
As much as he was a madcap comedy guy, he also had a huge heart and had the ability to be dramatic and to be sympathetic in roles like that.
Williams' talent was revered by critics, actors, and fellow comics.
Robin Williams is the master comedian, and his genius will keep us all very happy for a long time.
But for generations of fans who grew up watching Robin Williams, his rare genius will live on through his work.
That you are here. That life exists and identity. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?
And his unique verse will echo in both the laughter and the tears of others.
Thank you for joining us for Awareness. Millions are remembering actor and comedian Robin Williams, and many are now asking how a man known for his laughter could have been so overcome by depression that he took his own life. To talk about this complex topic, we bring in Helen Pridgeon, the South Carolina director of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, also Sissy Weaver from NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And 1 year ago on Tuesday, Columbia-born actor Lee Thompson Young took his own life. This morning, we're also joined by his mother, Dr. Velma Love, via Skype from Washington, D.C., where she is a visiting scholar at Howard University School of Divinity. She is also the co-founder of the Lee Thompson Young Foundation. Thank you all for being with us this morning. Dr. Love, we start with you. We are coming up on the 1 year anniversary. How is your family doing, and how did you respond to Robin Williams' death?
Megan, we certainly were devastated by the news, and it had an even more significant impact because it's about the time of the anniversary of my son's death. So my heart goes out to the family and to the entertainment community, all of the friends, the comedy colleagues of Robin Williams. Such news really shakes the body. It knocks you off balance. And over the past year, we have been supported by so much love from so many people that we have been able to regain our footing, to begin to write a new chapter in our lives, and we have established the Lee Thompson Young Foundation,
Right.
which is very therapeutic for us. So we are doing well as we approach the anniversary of the death.
Now, with Lee Thompson Young's suicide, with Robin Williams' suicide, Helen and Sissy, there are so many reasons for it, and a lot of times the reasons are kind of shrouded in mystery. We'll never really know the full reasons why, but mental illness does play a role. In Lee Thompson Young's case, his mother has said he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So how does mental illness play a factor in this very complex situation?
Well, a mental illness affects the way we feel, it affects our emotions and our actions. And about 90% of people who die by suicide, studies have shown, have a diagnosable mental illness at the time of death. Now, there are other complicating factors, as you mentioned, but this is one of the leading risk factors. Now, most people with mental illness never make an attempt on their lives. So it's very important for your listeners to hear that. But of those who do, about 90%, the majority have a diagnosable mental illness at the time. And when someone makes an attempt, they are in intense psychological pain, and they're trying to stop that pain, stop that suffering. Can be overwhelming.
Sure. Now, Dr. Love, I want to bring you back into the conversation. We've talked about Lee Thompson Young having a disorder. Do you blame that disorder for his suicide?
I try not to identify any place for blame, but I am aware now, after the fact, that the mental illness impedes the executive functioning of the brain. So I came to the understanding that the person that I knew as my son, who was such a loving and compassionate person, Lee Thompson Young, is not the person who took his life. So that person that we all knew and loved, and we asked, how could he do this? He couldn't do that. That was an impaired malfunction of the brain, and that is my understanding. That really helped me to accept and deal with the loss.
Sure. And a lot of people now are saying, you know, it's selfish of people to do this because of all the people, the loved ones that they leave behind. But in your case and how you've been talking to other people about dealing with suicide, it's a point of desperation for people, and it becomes so overwhelming.
It can become harder to see your options, and sometimes you can feel like your loved ones will be better off without you. It can be so seductive. You can come to believe that. And a good friend of mine who worked in mental health for years and who also suffers from bipolar disorder for a number of years, has shared with me that depression is a liar. You can believe that your situation is hopeless and you are helpless. And so often we need someone present at that point in time to convince that person that there is hope and to hold that hope for them. But quite often there's nobody who's there, or the phone doesn't ring at that moment in time.
Sure, but there is help out there. There are resources. And Sissy, I want to bring you into the discussion. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of treatment that you have sought out for your mental illness.
Well, I was in psychotherapy for many years with a private psychologist, and I am now in therapy at Columbia Mental Health and see a psychiatrist there, and I take medication and have taken a whole cocktail of different medications to find things that work. And I still suffer with some depression and some psychosis and things like that. So I've often said it would be easier to deal with chronic physical pain than it is to deal with a bad bout of depression.
But there are resources out there that have been helping you. And Helen and Dr. Love, I want to talk a little bit about what are some other resources out there for people, because a lot of people, whether they are diagnosed or not, have their own struggles, their own demons. So what kind of resources are there for people?
Well, there are interactive therapies like CBT, for an example, cognitive behavior therapy. That's just one example. There are medications. There are about 22 approved medications by the FDA for depression. There are other treatments available, and you can access through those treatments through mental health providers. And psychiatrists most often write the prescriptions, medical doctors, but there are counselors, social workers, many in practice through the mental health centers in our state or through nonprofit practices even that charge on a sliding fee scale. Could I add something to what Sissy said? I have a friend who is in a wheelchair. She's a paraplegic, but she also suffers from depression. And what she said to me is if I were to choose between the two, if I were to choose one, I would take the wheelchair, because you can't see my depression and you don't understand it. People don't understand that. Right. But it can be as debilitating for me as this wheelchair. So I think that's makes a very good point for all of us. It's a very powerful point.
Right. Dr. Love, let's talk about the foundation and what the foundation is trying to do to raise awareness.
The primary mission of the foundation is to help erase the stigma associated with mental illness. So our first project is called Project Reach Local, and that is the vehicle for hosting community conversations where people can come together in homes, in schools, in churches, in community centers, and have an open dialogue and conversation with a mental health professional present. We feel as if many people do not seek help because of the stigma associated with mental illness.
Right.
You know, it's okay to talk about heart disease, hypertension, and even now HIV/AIDS, but it is still not okay to talk about a mental illness. So we really we envision a world where this is no longer an issue, where people can talk about mental illness, can seek help, can be embraced, and not have to fear rejection, ridicule, or loss of a job. We also want to focus on children and youth, young adults, because the research indicates that at least 50%, if not more, of the mental health problems in adults start before the age of 14. So we're very interested in the holistic development of a person, from infancy throughout the spectrum of life.
Right. Well, I want to bring up our crisis number, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. It's 1-800-273-TALK. 8255. If you need help, there is help out there. People are willing to listen and to provide resources to help. And just to wrap up our conversation, Helen and Sissy, let's talk a little bit, very briefly, about the survivor's guilt and how deaths like on Robin Williams' scale can kind of bring up some new emotions for people.
Well, often for survivors, there is such regret. You wish that you could have done something that would have made a difference.
Right.
And often you were not there at that point in time, and you had been providing so much support, throughout your relationship, and you just couldn't be there at that point in time, and you wish somebody could have been.
Right.
And because of the stigma, you feel that other people don't understand this and might even blame you.
Sure.
And survivors have done the best they could with what they knew at that point in time as well. So it's important to remind survivors to take care of themselves right now. When a notable figure dies by suicide, and it's in the news as it is right now, it can often bring up these emotions, this grief, the grief again.
Right.
So it's important to remind survivors to take care of themselves, not only survivors of loss, but survivors of attempts.
Right.
We want survivors of attempts to, if they need help right now, to
Address
reach out,
that.
to ask for it, to ask for what you need. You deserve it.
Right.
So
Well,
ask for what you need.
Well, thank you all so much for being with us this morning and talking about this very complex subject. Now, on our Awareness Facebook page, we have posted the crisis number and other resources to help. We also have a link to the Lee Thompson Young Foundation. Still to come on Awareness, a case of surrender or self-defense. Another black, unarmed teenager shot and killed. The demand for justice is strong while the facts of the case are still being sorted out. Up next, what are we teaching our community about these tragedies? Last Saturday, 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. He and a friend were walking in the middle of the street when they were stopped by a police officer. What happened after that is still being disputed. Police say Brown assaulted the officer first, and that's when the cop acted in self-defense. Witnesses say Brown had his hands up in surrender when he was shot repeatedly. While the facts are still being sorted, one fact is clear: Brown was unarmed. Joining me now is Bishop Eric Freeman of the Meeting Place Church in Columbia and Lieutenant Curtis Wilson with the Richland County Sheriff's Department. Well, it has happened again, post Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis. Now, we're not here to talk about the facts of the case, who was right, who was wrong, but we do need to discuss what is happening with the youth and what we're teaching the youth when it comes to situations like this. So, Bishop Freeman, where does the problem start?
Well, Megan, I want to first thank you for taking time to continue to build awareness around the importance of discussing these types of challenges. And I believe, to get to your question, one of the steps that we can take as a community, and we talked a little bit about this last year, is to make every effort to give voice to our young people, to equip them to navigate those difficult moments. I don't know if the best approach right now, really not about what is the best approach, but I do know that what is most vital right now is that our young people are equipped to navigate difficult situations. We have a program called Live to Tell that we've done for the last 9 years, and the primary focus is when you're put in a difficult situation, understand as a student, as a young person, you may not be viewed as others, and there are certain key things that you need to make sure you do to put yourself in the best position to survive and to live and to tell.
Right. Well, before we get into what are some of the best steps and practices, does it start with a misunderstanding of culture, whether it's race or whether it's youth misunderstanding law enforcement? What do you think, Lieutenant Wilson?
I think for law enforcement itself, it's really not about the race issue. For me, and as an officer, it's just based on the circumstances of that incident at that particular time. Of course, again, not speaking about that particular incident that took place in St. Louis, it's what that officer sees, what that officer hears, what's going on, what led him to that location where he is at that time. And again, what's the reaction of the individual that he's confronting? Officer doesn't know who this person is, doesn't know if they just committed a crime, if they have a weapon on them, anything like that. So he's approaching it with caution. So any movements or things of that nature, he has to watch, he has to hear.
Right. So there really are unknowns on both sides, from the suspect side or the law enforcement side. But are there certain things that both sides need to do to prevent a situation like this? Let's start with the youth.
Well, to kind of continue what Lieutenant Wilson has said, I do think that there needs to be an awareness for a young person that whoever it is that they're interacting with has no idea who they are. And so every effort needs to be made to make sure that they communicate to the other person that I'm not a threat. And not to get into whether that is right, that this particular person has to do it versus this particular person has to do it. It is a reality. And you need to make every effort to make sure you communicate that I am not a threat.
Right, and from the law enforcement side.
Yeah, what Pastor's saying, he's so right on that. It's, you know, again, at that initial stage, that initial moment, officer doesn't know exactly everything that's going on. So for the individual that he's talking to, that person, just comply. Just comply at that moment. If he says, put your hands up, if he says, you know, don't move, just comply at that moment. Everything else would be sorted out later. But for that first instinct, it's about safety.
Well, we're just getting started. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back to continue this conversation. Welcome back. Let's jump right back into our conversation. Is there a way to strike a balance here between the two sides? Is that possible?
Understanding, you know, what the law enforcement's job is. And then, of course, we have to understand the situation that we're coming into. Again, without all the details being there, what do we say? Let's just comply with the commands that the officer has given them, just for the moment, again, until we can get it all sorted out. And if an individual who's being stopped by an officer understands that, things won't escalate as they do. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. And one of the things that Lieutenant Wilson said earlier, that much of what we're dealing with is not a race issue. If we do have a race issue, I've said this quite often to our young people, is if we do have a race issue, and I talked about this with Time Magazine last year, it is a human race issue. And so when we're fighting these types of battles, we're not wrestling against flesh and blood. It's not a skin issue as much as it is a sin issue. Or to use language that may make a little bit more sense depending on who's listening, none of us are perfect. And so part of the understanding is everyone coming to the table knowing, you know what, I have some stereotypes I bring. And so I need to make sure that as I approach these students or these young people or whoever it is, that I approach them in a way that there's an awareness of my stereotypes. And then for the student to know, listen, you know what, I'm not perfect in this situation either. And I want to make sure that I create a context where it's very clearly communicated that I'm not a threat.
Right. Well, and then sometimes I think the youth and even adults will play into their own stereotypes, and they'll say, well, law enforcement is after me anyway, so you know, why should I be so complacent and compliant because they're just profiling me, for example. So I mean, do the youth, do the adults have another role to play there? I mean, because or should they just be compliant? You
know, as an officer, and this has happened to me, whereas if there's a little child that's misbehaving and a parent is with that child, you know what the parent will say? I'm going to tell that police officer on you. So what does that do automatically instill into that child? So we often go to the parents and we tell them, don't do that. We want them to know that we're here for them. We're here to protect them. We're here to you know, make sure that they're safe and secure. But if you tell them this, what are they going to do? They're going to feel, oh, I'm not going to go to that cop. He's going to lock me up and throw me in jail. And that's not our job. Our job is to be proactive. It's to make sure that you don't get in trouble. We try to instill that in youth. You know what I mean?
I know we just got started, but thank you both so much for being with me this morning, and I would love to continue this conversation at another time.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with a final thought. Robin Williams will be remembered most for how he made you feel. Happiness and laughter, sometimes to the point of tears. His roles so vast and wide, but as we're learning, his demons perhaps just as deep. We all have struggles, and we never know what the person next to us is truly going through. Even though the struggle is never simple, we can survive because there is help. If you need help or know someone who does, call the crisis line. We'd like to thank all of our guests this morning. Until next time, I'm Megan Norman. This is Awareness.